The first thing people usually noticed about the Ashford estate was the silence. Not because it was empty, but because everything inside it seemed carefully arranged, as though even the breeze had been invited. White roses climbed ancient stone walls. Crystal lanterns shimmered beneath towering oak trees, waiting for evening to wake them. Every chair faced a flower-covered aisle that looked almost too perfect to walk across. I had photographed weddings for 6 years. I knew that perfection was only the surface. Underneath every carefully folded napkin and every practiced smile, someone was always afraid. Afraid of saying the wrong thing. Afraid of losing someone. Afraid that happiness might disappear before the night was over. "Morning, Sawyer," she said, checking her clipboard. "Big day." "It certainly looks like one." She laughed softly. "Nearly 200 guests. Everything has to be flawless." Flawless. It was a beautiful word. It was also the heaviest one. Inside the ballroom, decorators hurried between long tables covered in ivory linen. Crystal glasses reflected streams of morning sunlight. Soft music drifted from hidden speakers while florists adjusted white lilies one petal at a time. Everyone seemed busy. No one noticed the photographer. That was perfectly fine with me. Being invisible had become strangely comfortable. I unpacked my equipment near one of the windows, testing each lens with quiet concentration. Weddings weren't about expensive cameras. They were about moments. The trembling hand before a promise. The smile someone tried to hide. The tear that appeared before anyone expected it. Those were the memories people kept forever. As I adjusted the focus, movement near the staircase caught my attention. A man stood alone, speaking quietly with one of the planners. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that fit him effortlessly. Sunlight rested against his shoulders as though it already knew him. His posture was calm, but there was something thoughtful about the way he watched the room. Then he turned. For one impossible second, time simply stopped. Graham Mercer. 6 years had passed. His hair was slightly shorter now. His face carried the confidence adulthood often carved into kind people. Yet his eyes hadn't changed. They were still impossibly gentle. He looked directly at me. Not past me. Not through me. At me. My fingers tightened around the camera. Not dramatically. Just enough for old memories to wake all at once. The library where we studied until midnight. Coffee that always grew cold because we talked too much. Rainy afternoons walking across campus without caring that our shoes were soaked. Back then, neither of us had ever found the courage to name what quietly lived between us. Friendship had been the safest word, even if it had never been the truest one. Someone called Graham's name. He looked away. The moment disappeared. I lowered my camera and reminded myself why I was here. Work. Nothing more. The bridal suite buzzed with laughter upstairs, while downstairs the catering staff arranged polished silver trays. Every hallway carried a different conversation. I moved naturally through the estate, photographing details before guests arrived. The invitation cards. The wedding rings. The flowers resting beneath soft afternoon light. Every image looked beautiful. None of them felt real. As I entered the main hallway again, Graham appeared unexpectedly beside one of the tall windows. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. "Hi, Sawyer." His voice was exactly as I remembered. Warm, gentle, careful. "It's been a long time," I answered. "It has." An awkward silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable. I guess life had other plans. A quiet smile touched his face. "You always notice things other people missed." I wasn't prepared for those words. Years had passed, yet somehow he still remembered. Before I could answer, another voice interrupted us. "There you are." A sharply dressed man approached with effortless confidence. "Nathan Holloway, today's groom." He wrapped an arm casually around Graham's shoulder before noticing me. "You must be the photographer." "Yes." Nathan nodded politely, though his smile never quite reached his eyes. "I'll do my best." Not continuously. Just often enough that I couldn't ignore it. Each time our eyes met, he looked away first, as though he wanted to say something but couldn't find a safe place to begin. Nathan noticed. The smile on his face faded for the smallest moment. His eyes followed Graham's gaze until they landed on me. He didn't say anything, But something cold settled behind his expression. The celebration continued. Music grew louder. Champagne glasses clinked together. Laughter echoed beneath strings of glowing lights. Yet beneath all the beauty, an invisible tension quietly gathered. I couldn't explain it, only feel it. Some weddings celebrated love. Others revealed truths people had spent years trying to hide. Standing behind my camera, surrounded by nearly 200 smiling strangers, I had the strange feeling that before this night was over, someone's carefully built world would begin to fall apart. I just didn't know that it would start with me. Did you like this feature? Morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the estate, turning the polished marble floors into mirrors of gold. The celebration had officially begun. But to me, every wedding always started long before the ceremony. It began in the quiet moments, when people still believed they could hide what they were feeling. Those moments were the ones I loved to photograph. I moved carefully through the bridal suite, capturing laughter, gentle embraces, and nervous smiles. Nathan stood surrounded by his closest friends, laughing at a joke I couldn't hear. He looked confident, almost flawless, as though nothing in the world could disturb the future he had planned. But every time I raised my camera toward him, I noticed something missing. His smile never stayed for long. It disappeared whenever Graham stepped out of the room. That small detail stayed with me. A photographer learned to trust tiny changes more than dramatic ones. Later, while I adjusted my camera beside the garden fountain, footsteps approached behind me. I hoped I'd find you here. I turned. Graham stood a few feet away, hands resting quietly in his pockets. For a moment, neither of us moved. The years between us suddenly felt much shorter. I've seen your work online, he said. I blinked in surprise. You have? He smiled softly. More times than you'd probably believe. A warm breeze carried the scent of roses between us. I didn't know, I admitted. I wasn't sure you'd want to hear from me. His answer settled heavily in my chest. Neither of us had contacted the other. Both of us had assumed silence meant goodbye. It's strange, I said quietly. After all these years, it still feels easy to talk to you. We both spoke at almost the same time. A small laugh escaped us. For the first time that day, the silence between us felt familiar instead of painful. I've missed that, Graham whispered. So have I. The words slipped out before I could stop them. His eyes softened. They carried something deeper than nostalgia, something carefully protected. Before either of us could continue, an event assistant hurried toward us. Graham, Nathan's looking for you. His shoulders fell ever so slightly. I should go. I nodded. Of course. He took 2 steps away, then looked back. I watched him disappear into the estate once again. Long after he was gone, I realized I was smiling. That frightened me, because hope had always been more dangerous than heartbreak. The ceremony rehearsal continued throughout the afternoon. Guests arrived from different states, greeting one another with polished conversations and expensive gifts. I stayed behind my camera, watching, listening, collecting moments. As the sunlight softened, memories began finding me without permission. Years earlier, the university library had been nearly empty. Rain tapped gently against the windows while Graham sat across from me, pretending to study architecture. He hadn't turned a single page in 20 minutes. What? I asked. He smiled. You always know when I'm looking at you. You make it obvious. I thought I was being subtle. You've never been subtle. He laughed. It had always been my favorite sound. Sometimes we studied until the librarians switched off half the lights. Sometimes we walked back to campus beneath one umbrella. Sometimes we said nothing at all. Those had been the happiest evenings of my life. Back then, friendship had seemed enough. Or maybe we were simply too afraid to ask for more. A burst of laughter pulled me back to the present. I lifted my camera just in time to capture Nathan greeting another group of guests. Then someone new entered the courtyard. Tall, confident, easy smile. He crossed the lawn without hesitation before wrapping Graham in a warm embrace. The hug lasted only a few seconds, but my heart reacted much faster than my mind. Who was he? The stranger laughed while saying something that made Graham smile. A genuine smile I hadn't seen all day. They looked comfortable together, natural, as though years of friendship rested between them. Jealousy arrived quietly. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was simply the painful realization that life had continued while I had remained trapped inside old memories. An older guest standing beside me noticed where I was looking. "That's Miles Carter," she said casually. "You know him?" "He's practically family." Family. The word should have comforted me. Instead, it only left more questions. Throughout the evening, I saw Miles and Graham speaking several times. Each conversation felt effortless. Each laugh became another tiny ache inside my chest. Perhaps this was Graham's real happiness. Perhaps I had misunderstood everything years ago. Perhaps there had never been room for someone like me. As twilight settled over the estate, lanterns flickered to life across the gardens. The reception tables glowed beneath thousands of tiny lights. Everything looked magical. Everyone looked happy. I stood alone near the edge of the courtyard, reviewing photographs on my camera. "They're beautiful." Graham's voice startled me again. I handed him the camera without thinking. He studied each photograph carefully. "You still capture people the way you used to." "What do you mean?" "You always find the emotions everyone else misses." I looked away. "Sometimes emotions don't want to be found." "No," he answered quietly. "Sometimes people just become too afraid to show them, dangerously close to becoming something more." Before I could respond, Nathan called his name from across the lawn. There was impatience in his voice this time. Graham handed my camera back. "I'll see you later." "Maybe." He hesitated. "I hope so." He walked away. Nathan placed a possessive hand on Graham's shoulder before leading him toward the ballroom. I noticed Graham glance back only once. Our eyes met across the distance. There was sadness in his expression. Not regret. Not guilt. Sadness. As though he wanted to cross the space between us but didn't know how. I stood there long after they disappeared inside. For years, I had believed my heart had finally healed. Now I understood the truth. It had never stopped waiting. And somewhere inside that beautifully decorated estate, hidden beneath elegant smiles and expensive promises, another heart had been waiting too. Did you like this feature? By the time the sun disappeared behind the oak trees, the Ashford estate looked as though it belonged in another world. Thousands of tiny lights shimmered above the gardens. Crystal chandeliers reflected across the ballroom ceiling. Soft piano music floated through the air while nearly 200 guests filled the room with laughter, conversation, and the gentle clinking of champagne glasses. From behind my camera, everything looked perfect. Almost too perfect. Experience had taught me that perfection rarely lasted. I moved quietly between the tables, capturing grandparents smiling at children, old friends embracing, and couples swaying gently beneath the lights. The photographs would tell a story of happiness. Only I could see the cracks hiding beneath it. Nathan greeted every guest with effortless confidence. His smile appeared exactly when it was expected. His handshake was always firm. His laughter always arrived at the right moment. Yet every few minutes, his eyes searched for Graham. And every time Graham's attention drifted toward me, Nathan noticed. The distance between us was impossible to ignore. I tried to avoid looking at Graham. Felt safer that way. But every time I lifted my camera, I somehow found him standing inside the frame. Sometimes he was speaking with guests. Sometimes he stood quietly near the windows. Sometimes he simply watched me. There was a question in his eyes that neither of us seemed brave enough to ask. As dinner began, I stepped into a quieter hallway to replace the battery in my camera. The silence lasted only a few seconds. "Sawyer." I looked up. Graham stood in the doorway. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The music from the ballroom sounded distant now. "I've been trying to find a chance to talk to you," he said. "You've had plenty of chances." "I know." His voice carried quiet regret. "I just wasn't sure where to begin." I looked down at the camera in my hands. "Maybe some conversations come too late." He stepped a little closer. "I don't believe that." I wanted to believe him, more than anything. But years of unanswered questions had built walls that couldn't disappear overnight. Before either of us could say another word, someone called Graham from the ballroom. "Nathan." His voice was sharp, impatient. Graham closed his eyes for a brief moment. I have to go. Of course. He hesitated. I'll come back. I forced a polite smile. I'll still be working. He nodded and disappeared into the crowd once again. I watched the empty doorway long after he was gone. The reception reached its busiest hour. Waiters moved gracefully between tables carrying silver trays filled with sparkling glasses of red wine. The ballroom glowed with warmth. Guests laughed louder now. The music grew brighter. I climbed onto the small platform prepared for photographers, searching for the perfect angle of the first toast. Everything happened in seconds. One of the waiters stumbled after brushing against a chair. His tray tilted. Instinctively, I stepped aside. My shoulder bumped a tall decorative stand holding several glasses. Crystal crashed onto the polished floor. Red wine splashed across the white marble like spilled paint. The music stopped. Conversations vanished. Nearly 200 faces turned toward me. Silence settled over the ballroom. I'm sorry, I said immediately. I didn't mean. Nathan crossed the room before I could finish. His polished smile had completely disappeared. Do you have any idea how expensive that display was? I'm sorry. It was an accident. An accident? His voice echoed through the silent ballroom. This wedding has taken months to plan. I'll pay for the damage. Nathan laughed without warmth. You? The single word carried enough humiliation to make my face burn. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Others whispered behind raised glasses. Vivian Holloway slowly approached, dressed in an elegant silver gown. She looked at the broken glass before looking at me. This, she said calmly, is exactly why people should stay within their place. The words landed harder than the shattered crystal. I lowered my eyes. I truly am sorry. Sorry doesn't restore dignity, Vivian replied. It certainly doesn't replace class. Quiet laughter rose from one side of the ballroom. Someone muttered something I couldn't hear. Another guest shook his head with obvious disappointment. I wanted nothing more than to disappear. One of the catering staff offered me a clean towel. Before I could take it, another guest walked past carrying a nearly full glass of red wine. His shoulder brushed mine. The glass tipped. Cold wine poured across the front of my white dress shirt. Deep crimson spread across the fabric. A few people gasped. Someone laughed. No one moved. For one endless moment, I simply stood there, covered in wine, surrounded by strangers. Every painful memory I had spent years trying to bury returned all at once. The classmates who laughed at me for being different. The neighbors who whispered. The moments I convinced myself that staying invisible was safer than being seen. It all returned beneath the bright lights of that ballroom. I kept my eyes on the floor. If I looked up, I feared I might break. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, steady, certain. They stopped directly in front of me. Without saying a word, someone gently placed a suit jacket over my shoulders. The fabric was warm, familiar. I looked up. Graham. His eyes were filled not with embarrassment, but with heartbreak. He carefully adjusted the jacket around me as though nothing else in the room mattered. The ballroom remained completely silent. Nathan stared at him in disbelief. Graham. He didn't answer. Instead, Graham turned toward the guests. His voice remained calm, quiet, impossible to ignore. He deserved kindness long before tonight. No one spoke. Not Vivian. Not Nathan. Not the guests. Only silence answered him. Then Graham reached for my trembling hand. Not dramatically. Not as a performance. Simply because he couldn't bear seeing me stand there alone. Our eyes met. For the first time in 6 years, I saw the truth I had spent so long denying. He had never looked at me with pity. He had always looked at me with love. And in front of 200 silent guests, the perfect wedding began to fall apart. The ballroom remained frozen. No one reached for another glass. No one returned to their conversations. The music had stopped, leaving only the faint hum of the chandeliers above us. Graham's hand was still wrapped around mine. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It wasn't meant to embarrass anyone. It was simply steady, warm, certain. For the first time that evening, I didn't feel invisible. Nathan broke the silence first. "What are you doing?" His voice shook with confusion more than anger. Graham looked at him calmly. "I'm leaving for a while." Nathan stared at our joined hands. "With him?" "Yes." The single word echoed through the ballroom. Vivian stepped forward, struggling to keep her composure. "Graham, think carefully about what you're doing." "I have," he answered quietly. "For a very long time." He turned toward me. "Come with me." My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the whispers beginning to spread across the room. I nodded. Without another word, we walked together through the ballroom. Nearly 200 guests watched us leave. Some looked shocked. Some looked uncomfortable. A few lowered their eyes, ashamed they had said nothing while I was being humiliated. The cool evening air met us the moment we stepped outside. The heavy ballroom doors closed behind us. The silence of the gardens felt almost unreal after everything that had happened. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Our footsteps were enough. Finally, Graham stopped beside the old fountain where I had photographed flowers earlier that morning. "I'm sorry." His voice was barely above a whisper. "So am I." He looked confused. "What are you sorry for?" "For believing you stopped caring." His shoulders dropped. "Sawyer. I spent 6 years convincing myself I imagined everything." I looked toward the dark water of the fountain. "I thought I misunderstood every smile, every conversation, every moment we shared." "You didn't." His answer came immediately. "You never misunderstood." The words stole the air from my lungs. He stepped closer. "There wasn't a single day I forgot you." I searched his face, trying to decide whether hope was safe. It didn't feel safe. It felt terrifying. "Then why?" I whispered. "Why didn't you come after me?" Pain crossed his face. "I did." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "The week after graduation." His eyes glistened beneath the lantern light. "I went to your apartment." My heartbeat slowed. "You were gone." "I moved because my lease ended." "I know that now." He looked down at his hands. "I left a letter with your landlord." My breath caught. "A letter?" "I wrote everything." His voice trembled. "I told you I loved you." The world around me seemed to disappear. "I never received it." "I know." His eyes filled with tears. "Months later, I learned your landlord had thrown away several pieces of mail after tenants moved." I closed my eyes. 6 years. Lost because of a letter neither of us knew had vanished. "I thought you read it and chose not to answer." He swallowed hard. "And when I heard you'd moved across the country." He couldn't finish the sentence. "I believed you'd found someone else." I laughed softly through my tears. "It was exactly what I believed about you." We stood there in heartbreaking silence. Two people who had loved each other for years, separated not by betrayal, but by misunderstanding. The realization hurt more than either of us expected. After a long moment, Graham sat on the edge of the fountain. "I need to tell you something else." I sat beside him. "Nathan wasn't always like this." I listened quietly. "When we met, I was lonely." He looked toward the stars. "My father had just passed away. I didn't know. I never told many people." His voice remained calm, though grief still lived inside it. "Nathan was kind in the beginning." He smiled sadly. "He helped me through the hardest year of my life." "So what changed?" "Little by little." He sighed. "I stopped making my own decisions." He paused. "I stopped seeing old friends. My work became my whole life. And every time I mentioned you." He looked at me. Nathan changed the subject. A cold feeling settled inside me. "You mean?" "I don't know whether it was intentional." He shook his head gently. "But somehow the distance between us kept growing." I lowered my eyes. "I blamed myself." "So did I." We both smiled sadly. It was strange how two hearts could carry the same guilt without ever speaking. Behind us, the ballroom doors opened. Voices drifted into the gardens. The celebration had dissolved into confusion. Guests were leaving their tables. Someone called Nathan's name. Someone else tried to calm Vivian. The perfect evening was quietly falling apart. "I should go," I said softly. I've already caused enough trouble. You didn't cause this. Graham turned toward me. I've been living a life that didn't belong to me. His voice grew steadier. I was just too afraid to admit it. A tear slipped down my cheek. He reached out slowly, not to pull me closer, not to rush anything, only to wipe away the tear with the gentlest touch. I don't expect you to trust me tonight, he whispered. I know trust takes time. I know 6 years can't disappear in one conversation. But I don't want to spend another day pretending my heart belongs somewhere it doesn't. I searched his eyes. There was no performance, no dramatic speech, only honesty, raw, quiet, patient. For the first time since we met again, I allowed myself to believe that perhaps the story I had buried years ago had never truly ended. Perhaps it had simply been waiting for the truth. And somewhere behind the ballroom walls, as guests whispered about the wedding that would never be remembered for its flowers or crystal chandeliers, another chapter of our lives was finally beginning. Not with certainty, but with courage. The night no longer belonged to the wedding. It belonged to the truth. Inside the ballroom, confusion had replaced celebration. Guests spoke in hushed voices, unsure whether to leave or stay. The orchestra had quietly packed away their instruments. The towering wedding cake remained untouched beneath the soft lights, beautiful but suddenly meaningless. I stood beside Graham in the garden, listening to the distant murmur of nearly 200 people trying to understand what had happened. He took a slow breath. I have to finish this. I nodded, even though every part of me was afraid. You don't have to do it alone. A faint smile touched his face. I know. Together, we walked back toward the ballroom. The moment the doors opened, every conversation stopped. Hundreds of eyes turned toward us. Nathan stood near the center of the room. His tie was loose now, and the confidence he had worn all day had vanished. Vivian stood beside him, still trying to preserve what little dignity remained. Graham walked forward without letting go of my hand. When he reached Nathan, he spoke gently. I'm sorry. Nathan stared at him for a long moment. Is this because of him? Graham looked at me before answering. No. It's because I've spent too many years pretending I was living the life I wanted. Silence settled over the room. I care about you, Nathan, Graham continued. I always will. But caring for someone isn't the same as loving them the way they deserve. Nathan closed his eyes. For the first time that evening, there was no anger in his face. Only heartbreak. You should have told me sooner. I should have. I'm sorry. Nathan gave a slow, painful nod. So am I. Neither man raised his voice. Neither blamed the other. Some endings didn't need shouting. Some simply needed honesty. Nathan looked toward me. I treated you unfairly. His words surprised me. I let my pride speak louder than my kindness. He lowered his head. I'm sorry, Sawyer. I could still remember the humiliation, the laughter, the cold wine soaking through my shirt. The memories would not disappear overnight. But I also knew that holding on to bitterness would only keep the wound open. I accept your apology, I said quietly. The ballroom remained silent. Then, one by one, guests began leaving. No applause, no dramatic speeches, only quiet footsteps fading into the night. 3 months later, autumn arrived in Charleston. The heavy summer air had given way to cool mornings and streets covered in golden leaves. Life felt slower, gentler. The wedding had become yesterday's headline. People had moved on. So had we. Not quickly, not perfectly, but honestly. Graham never tried to rush my forgiveness. He never expected me to trust him simply because we had confessed our feelings. Instead, he showed up. Every week. Sometimes with coffee. Sometimes with lunch. Sometimes with nothing more than an hour of conversation while we walked through the city park. We spoke about everything we had missed. The jobs. The dreams. The lonely birthdays. The families who had changed. The friends who had come and gone. We also spoke about the pain. The misunderstandings. The years we had lost. Some conversations ended with smiles. Others ended with tears. Each one brought us a little closer. Love, I realized, wasn't built through grand declarations. It grew quietly inside ordinary days. One chilly Saturday morning, I was photographing a small wedding beside the ocean. Couldn't have been more different from the Holloway wedding. Only 20 guests attended. Wildflowers decorated simple wooden chairs. Children laughed freely across the sand. Nothing was extravagant. Everything felt real. When the ceremony ended, I packed away my camera and walked toward the parking area. Someone was waiting beside my car. Graham. He held 2 cups of coffee. "I guessed you'd be cold." I smiled. "You were right." He handed me one of the cups. We walked along the shoreline together. Neither of us hurried to fill the silence. The waves did that for us. After several minutes, Graham stopped walking. "I've been thinking. That's usually dangerous." He laughed softly. "I know." Then his expression grew serious. "I don't want fear making decisions for us anymore." My heart beat a little faster. "I'm not asking for promises. I'm not asking you to forget the past." He looked into my eyes. "I'm only asking whether you'd like to see where tomorrow takes us." No dramatic music played. No audience watched. No one interrupted. Just the sea, the wind, and 2 hearts that had waited long enough. I reached for his hand. This time I was the one who closed the distance. "I'd like that." His fingers gently intertwined with mine. The smile that appeared on his face wasn't loud. It wasn't perfect. It was peaceful. A year later, I stood behind my camera once again. Another wedding. Another beginning. As the newly married couple walked down the aisle surrounded by laughter and flower petals, I captured the happiest photograph of the day. When my work was finished, I looked across the garden. Graham was waiting beneath an old oak tree, just as he had promised. Not because he needed to watch over me. Not because he feared losing me again. Simply because we had chosen to build a life where neither of us walked alone. I crossed the lawn toward him. He smiled before I even reached him. "You ready to go home?" I looked at the evening sky, glowing with the warm colors of sunset. Then I looked back at the man who had once been my greatest heartbreak and had slowly become my safest place. "Yeah," I said with a smile. "I am." He gently took my hand, and together we walked toward the future. Not as 2 people trying to recover the years they had lost, but as 2 people grateful for every ordinary day they still had ahead of them. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive when life is easy. Sometimes it waits patiently behind years of silence, misunderstanding, and fear. And when it finally finds the courage to speak, it doesn't ask for perfection. It only asks to be chosen. Did you like this feature?